Yeah, it's a really good question. The president is appalled by the defund the police movement. The fact that you have sitting congresswomen wanting to defund the police, notably Rashida Tlaib, notably Biden advisor AOC Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a former Clinton and Eric Holder spokesperson Brian Fallon, wanting to defund our police across this country, it is extraordinary. And when you think the left has gone far, and they couldn't possibly go farther, because we all remember the defund ICE movement. They want to defund immigration and custom enforcement, and now they want to defund the police. This is extraordinary. This is rolling back the protective layers that protect Americans in their homes and in their places of business. He's appalled by it, and it's remarkable to hear this coming from today's Democrat Party. As for solutions, he's talking through a number of proposals, no announcements on that, but he definitely, as he's noted, recognizes the horrid injustice done to George Floyd and is taking a look at various proposals. The president's been very clear there are injustices in society. I've noted several for you that he's pointed out as a Republican primary candidate, noting the Sandra Bland video was absolutely horrible, noting George Floyd. There's a civil rights investigation into that. He definitely believes there are instances of racism, but look, he believes our law enforcement are the best in the world. He believes that by and large they are good people. The 750 who were injured defending this country from rioters in Antifa in the streets, as to be distinguished from the peaceful protesters, those 750 officers who were hurt defending our country were heroes, as was David Dorn, a police officer who lost his life, and Patrick Underwood, who also lost his life in the last week or so.
But he doesn't think that there's systemic racism in law enforcement.
He believes most of our police officers are good, hardworking people, and there's a lot of evidence of that, and he has great faith in our police department.
Okay.
No, there's no regrets on the part of this White House because, look, I'd note that many of those decisions were not made here within the White House. It was AG Barr who made the decision to move the perimeter. Monday night, Park Police also had made that decision independently when they saw all of the violence in Lafayette Square. And before these protesters were moved by Park Police and they issued that tactical order, there were 3 loud warnings. And as I believe it was AG Barr on Face the Nation noted, that some of those protesters moved back and adhered to the warning, but others of those protesters started hurling objects, and that was unacceptable. And Park Police acted as they felt they needed to at that time in response, and we stand by those actions.
The country and the world saw this violent clash between people who were otherwise peacefully protesting, but really the president is not sorry for the way things went?
No, the president is sorry about the fact that Antifa wreaked havoc in our streets and the failure of some members of the media to note that. Like CNN's Chris Cuomo said, show me where it says protesters are supposed to be peaceful. Well, I'd point him to the First Amendment where it says that you have the right to, quote, peaceably assemble. He should go back and read the Constitution. There are many others out there, like Don Lemon, saying that rioting is a mechanism to restructure our country. Burning down St. John's, using a pick to literally like carve out, as we saw in that video, concrete from the sidewalk to hurl at officers, that's not peacefully protesting. The actions of the rioters were not in keeping with the First Amendment. And I think the media needs to recognize there's a discernment between the peaceful protesters, many of whom I've seen, and the rioters. And yes, America will act against rioters. And yes, under President Trump, he will not allow burning buildings, 150 federal buildings to be defaced, and 750 law enforcement officers to be injured in our country.
Can I ask you one more about the president?
Yes, Ryan. Yeah, Mitt Romney can say 3 words outside on Pennsylvania Avenue, but I would note this, that President Trump won 8% of the black vote. Mitt Romney won 2% of the black vote. I believe President Trump, people across the country recognize that while Mitt Romney has a lot of words, notably he said that 47% of the nation is dependent upon government, believes they are victims, believes that the government has a responsibility to care for them. Those were Mitt Romney's words not too long ago. The president takes great offense to those words. That's not America. Guess what America is? It's when given opportunity via a Trump opportunity zone, belief that Americans of all races can rise to the occasion and achieve, belief in HBCUs and giving record funding to HBCUs, because we need to enable education in our country and school choice. Those kind of actions on the part of the president stand in stark contrast with the very empty words of Senator Romney. Yes. What the president believes is, look, when you look at, I would just take at their own words, Black Lives Matter DC, and Black Lives Matter DC said Black Lives Matter means defund the police. So if that's what the movement means, of course the president stands against defunding the police. All Black Lives Matter, including the life of David Dorn, who perished in the last week and a half, including Patrick Underwood, who also lost his life this week. All Black Lives Matter, but in terms of the movement Black Lives Matter, they define themselves as defund the police, and that's something this president stands against. One note that I really wanted to get in, should have weaved it in earlier, but I think it's important, is just there's so much focus on our police officers right now. There are absolute cases of injustices. Our heart breaks for those cases, but I just want to note some of the great things our police have done last year alone. In Alaska, retired cop Kim Castro jumped in freezing water to help victims to safety after a plane crash. In Idaho, a woman said, "He saved my son's life," commenting on a cop who saved her disabled son. In Maine, a detective was killed while helping a motorist. In Rhode Island, a baby who was choking was saved by an officer. In Maryland, an officer was hailed for intervening in an active shooting incident. North Carolina, police thwarted a mass shooting. In Ohio, police took down a mass shooter at a bar. In Wisconsin, a terminally ill girl was visited by 40 officers and canines. In New York, Officers Bies and Officer Roman of the NYPD responded to an incident involving a homeless man. They bought him new glasses, a haircut, and a new suit, and they helped him to find a job. In Detroit, Michigan, an officer helped a homeless man struggling to shave in the streets. In Virginia, officers could be seen playing with little girls, playing dolls with them on the street. And in Arizona, Charlie called 911 asking for a Happy Meal mistakenly, and police delivered. This is who our great law enforcement officers are, and we should remember that. So I would note that what I said to Kristen just a bit ago, he wants to increase funding and CARES for education, but he's looking at potentially redirecting that to make sure it goes to the student, and it is most likely tied to the student and not to a district where schools are closed. And I would note that he said this is something he may consider in the tweet. Yeah, not in the ways that he'd want them to open. He wants them to reopen altogether. He wants students to be welcomed back to these schools because there are real consequences. Let's be clear about what we're talking about here. We're talking about a situation where you have the American Academy of Pediatrics talking about the negative impacts of children not in schools. Learning deficits is among them. There's increases in child and adolescent physical or sexual abuse because you don't have people reporting and notifying, like teachers and PE teachers and school personnel notifying health departments when they see signs of this. You have increased substance abuse, depression, and suicidal ideation, and this is from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So the president, he's going to push schools to reopen. These are grave consequences. Even CNN reporting that experts believe that the recent decline in calls to child abuse and neglect hotlines might really mean more cases are going unnoticed. This is unacceptable, and our schools are essential, and our teachers are essential workers, and he wants them to open, and that's why he's speaking out so strongly about this. As of yesterday, Kansas City had reached 100 homicides, a 40% increase from last year, according to the mayor's office. Absolutely tragic numbers. And Attorney General Barr has announced that there will be a launch of what's going to be called Operation Legend. It's a new initiative designated to fight the surge of violent crime that we've seen in Kansas City, directly in response to those requests by the mayor and by the governor. And specifically, Operation Legend is going to focus on a federal effort to increase law enforcement presence in the city. Attorney General Barr has directed agents from the Department of Justice's law enforcement agencies, the FBI, U.S. Marshal, DEA, and ATF, to be on the ground in Kansas City within the next 10 days to help state and local officials fight the surge of violent crime. Operation Legend is named after 4-year-old Legend Taliaferro, who tragically died on June 29th as a result of being shot in the face while he slept in his home. Taliaferro survived a heart surgery as an infant, and he tragically lost his life. And we at the federal government want to make sure that that never happens and use our resources to the fullest extent of the law to ensure that individuals and young children like Legend are able to live their lives and live so peacefully. Thank you so much. the media has been asking this question for 4 years, and for 4 years the president has said the same thing. His taxes are under audit, and when they're no longer under audit, he will release them. But I would also note the excruciating ruling for House Democrats, who were very much called out for their partisan games. They also subpoenaed the president's information, financial information, and Justice Roberts said, far from accounting for separation of powers concerns, the House's approach aggravates them by leaving essentially no limits on the congressional power to subpoena the president's personal records. So leave it to House Democrats, who did a partisan impeachment, a political witch hunt against this president, and this was yet another part, only to be rebuked by the Supreme Court. Well, where the president stands is he still maintains his initial position, and he agrees with Justice Thomas in the dissent, who said the demands on the president's time and the importance of his tasks are extraordinary, and the office of the president cannot be delegated to subordinates. A subpoena imposes both demands on the president's limited time and a burden, and he went on to describe that position. So he agrees with the dissent. He agrees with the dissent by Justice Thomas. So he takes issue with the point that the majority made on absolute immunity, but nevertheless, I would underscore the victory here as Cy Vance, the attorney, was not given what he wanted, which was access to the records.
He still thinks he's immune to investigation.
The president still stands beside the posture that he made. He accepts any Supreme Court opinion as the law of the land, but nevertheless doesn't change his viewpoint. He can disagree with the opinion, but he certainly will follow it.
On a different
I'd have to, this was an individual who was elected at the state level, so I guess the recourse would be the ballot box. But I would also note, just on that point, that you have President Obama and Vice President Biden, who were caught spying on the Trump campaign, the opposition party. You had former Vice President Biden in the Oval Office just before the inauguration talking about the Logan Act. And later, the Logan Act was weaponized and used against Lieutenant General Michael Flynn in a way that was so unfair and a grave miscarriage of justice. But you have Obama and Biden who get away with this, but yet we need to go investigate President Trump. It really is quite nonsensical. Yes. So I think you were referring to the tweet about broad deference, and what he was trying to note there, what he was noting was just that there should have been further deference to this notion that I read by Alexander Hamilton and others of absolute immunity to allow the executive and the president to do the very important job of protecting this country and all the other tasks given to a president of the United States.
You said the Supreme Court gives a delay ruling that they would never have given for another president.
Yeah, and I would also point you, with regards to that, I think Justice Alito hit on this. He said in the Clinton case, for example, the court held that a sitting president could be sued in federal courts, but the court took pains to reserve judgment on the question of whether a comparable claim might succeed in the state tribunal. Any direct control by a state court over the president, the court observed, might raise concerns about protecting federal officers from possible local prejudice. So that is to say that even back in the Clinton case, where federal court prosecutions were green-lighted, they gave their grave reservations for a state court proceeding of this nature. So I think he was noting the distinguishing features there. So the president has never mentioned adding other justices, but the Democrat Party has, as a way to get around, I guess, the rulings they don't like. And so one thing, I think I got to everyone, so just one last note I want to leave everyone with, because I do think it's a very important point, is just that there was a Rasmussen poll that came out recently that showed 64% of Americans are concerned about the growing criticism of America's police and that it will lead to a shortage of police officers and reduce public safety. And of all of the demographics polled, Black Americans fear most for public safety, with 67% acknowledging their concern for this. And this is why President Trump has taken action, calling strongly for law and order and peace in our streets, and he's set the tone at the top for mayors and governors. Additionally, we've had the hundreds of federal arrests, the executive order that's enhanced our police departments, and Operation Legend, which I announced yesterday from the Justice Department, in honor of Legend Taliaferro, a 4-year-old boy who was tragically killed in his sleep in Kansas City. And as we head into the weekend, this is our last press briefing of the week, and so I just wanted to make a plea for peace in our streets, because far too many children have been lost. It's important to know their names. It's important to see their faces. And may we all hold in our prayer and keep close to our hearts the families of Natalia Wallace, who was 7, Makai James, who was 10, Vernado Jones Jr., who was 14, Sincere Gaston, who was 1, Lena Nunez, who was 10, Amaria Jones, who was 13, Devon McNeil, who was 11, and Sequoia Turner down in Atlanta, who was 8. Let's make sure we have peace in our streets this weekend and hold these families in our prayers. Thank you.